Hello, this is Thomas Gray. This is the first of a series of videos I've called Precious Predestination. There's a common question that people ask constantly using different words. Is everything predestinated? Is there a reason for the things that happen? Do you believe in destiny? Do you believe in fate? Do we have free choice? Etc. Often a person who believes that everything is predestinated begins to think that his actions and decisions don't really matter. That whatever will be. So he begins to live recklessly or loses interest in everything except pleasure. He often feels that he's just a complex robot. On the other hand, a person who believes that he has at least some free choice often begins to feel pressure to achieve, along with pride for good results and guilt if things do not go well. Either way has seeming disadvantages and advantages. And it also seems like the only third option is to not think about it much, not be extreme in either direction. Just live your life, enjoy what you can, and hope for the best. I think most people take this third route and just turn away from this thorny issue. However, something eventually happens, usually a tragedy, that makes it seem like we need to know the answer. But then, it seems like there's no good answer, so we attempt to turn away again and quiet the nagging confusion. Activities of work or play, study, good times with family and friends, entertainment, pleasure-seeking, adventure-seeking, and or drugs seem to push the doubts and questions away, at least for a while, and people often live from while to while in this way. The issue often has religious implications, which can make it more painful. If God is the predestinator, then that seems to make God responsible for both the good and the bad. And how can I love God with all my heart, as many religions command, knowing that God caused some tragedy? On the other hand, if I have some free choice, then it seems like some things must depend on me, and that means that God is not in control of that area. How can I trust in God with all my heart, as many religions command, if He doesn't control everything? Well, it seems like a good reason to skip out of all religion, doesn't it? Or at least not to take it too seriously. Well, there is a real solution to this dilemma. And I found it because I paid attention to Jesus' words in Matthew 11:25, where He said that God reveals things to babies and hides them from sophisticated, learned man. I humbled myself as if I were a baby and I read the answer in the Holy Bible. If you hold on to certain concepts of philosophy and the theology some learned teacher taught you, and raise them as obstacles and objections, you will not find the solution. It will remain hidden from you, I believe. But if you give up all of that and imagine you're a little child again, and you simply listen to what the Bible says, you will see something that you never saw before, and problematic questions about predestination will vanish. Many problems in your life will probably vanish too. You will not have to ask, how do I know that the Bible is true and is from God? The fact that such a thorny question is unraveled in His words in a consistent and coherent way will give the evidence for that. Ready? No? Well, then I wish you farewell. But if you are ready, here we go. The first passage I want to look at is Ephesians 1 and verses 4, 5, and 11. They say, just as He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before Him in love, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to Himself, according to the good pleasure of His will. Verse 11 continues the idea, in Him also we have obtained an inheritance, being predestinated according to the purpose of Him who works all things according to the counsel of His will. Here, the main question is answered. God works out all things as He decided. Specifically, we are predestinated, that is, given a destiny. But in general, everything is predestinated. Everything is worked out by God in the way that He decided to do it. Let's look at another verse, or a couple verses, from Romans 8, 8:28 and 29 say, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. For whom He foreknew, He also predestinated to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren." Here we see that God He first foreknew. He must have done this. He first foreknew those who would be made like His Son. And He predestinated them for that destiny. This tells us that the predestination done in the past, before the world was founded, was not done blindly, but was done while knowing that person into the future. At the same time, we read that all things work together for good to these called people. Okay? Well, since God declares that all those things will work together for good, He has to know what those things are. And that means that God already decided what things will happen to His predestinated ones and what things will not happen. This confirms the statement from Ephesians chapter 1 that God has planned out all things. Okay, well, those who are familiar with the Bible will notice that Ephesians and Romans are both written by the Apostle Paul. They're both epistles written to different groups of the early Christians. And so let's check out another author of the Bible, Peter. Here we see the first two verses of Peter, and I've put in bold here the phrase that is really key here. It says, after he talks about all these people he's writing to, he says, elect according to the foreknowledge of God the Father and sanctification of the Spirit. Okay? But they're elect according to the foreknowledge of God. And also we can look at what Peter says in Acts 2:23, where it says, Him being delivered by the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God, you have taken by lawless hands, have crucified and put to death. Okay, is the phrase I'm getting at here is where it says it was done by the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God. Well, there's another verse here that I'd like us to look at. And it's Mark 13:20. These are the words of Jesus. Where he said, unless the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, whom He chose. Okay? And we can also look at the second recording of Jesus' words, where He said, You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you. You see, this teaching occurs repeatedly throughout the whole Bible. If predestination bothers a person, as it did me in the past, you can't get away from it unless you just keep away from the Bible, and even then you can't get away from it because, as I said, people are constantly asking questions like that. But the interesting thing is, this is consistent and coherent, the teaching. It happens, Jesus' words, Peter's words, Paul's words, it happens in the Old Testament or the Tanakh or the Torah. It happens, the words, John's teachings, in all of his throughout the Bible, it keeps coming up. And I'd say that this is part of the evidence that we have a deliberate message infused into this book, which was written by different men in different circumstances and times, yet It has a consistent and coherent message. Okay, so far we have the clear teaching that God decided and planned all things before the world existed, according to what he saw in the future and to accomplish his own purpose. Okay, this clears up the erroneous idea that thinks that if God predestinates something, then we can do nothing to affect the predestination. This is one of the biggest stumbling blocks. With God's foreknowledge in mind, it is clear that God can predestinate from the past and still respond to prayers that are made in the future. People often ask as a challenge, if I am predestinated to live, I should be able to run into a busy street with my eyes closed, and still I will not die. And if I am predestinated to die, it doesn't matter how careful I am, I will still die somehow. But when you have this biblical teaching of predestination according to foreknowledge, this confusion is resolved. I had better be careful, not reckless, because being reckless might mean that God could have made my predestination to die based on that. Okay? And speaking of philosophical possibilities now, and it opens up this possibility if God did this, it isn't just a blind mechanical predestination, but is a personal predestination based on a God who sees the future. This changes everything. And at the same time, it takes the pressure off of me, because there's room for God's mercy in allowing me to live in spite of my recklessness, if that will be for the best. In other words, I am responsible for my actions, but not entirely responsible for the whole outcome. Do you notice something? You can consistently live this way, according to this teaching. The tension, the uncertainty, anguish, and an overwhelming burden are all gone when we grasp this concept. This is practical evidence, if you don't want to call it proof, that we have the truth here. It fits us and our abilities, just as if this were a direct message from our Maker. You don't suppose? Well, that's the basic idea that answers the age-old agonizing question, and that satisfies the main philosophical challenge. In the next part of this video series, I want to address a theological issue, which is, how do you reconcile the biblical teaching of God's sovereignty with man's ability to choose? Does man have free will? Or are all of his choices controlled by God? If you're interested in that question, please continue watching part 2.